You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. A condenser, then I wouldn't recommend it. If you're recording not in a sound-treated room, you want a dynamic microphone. So look at the difference with mine right now.
This is incredible. I'm getting a massive feedback session. And the fact that you're giving so much of little tweak that is going to be so changing for the podcast. I think this is fantastic. So I want to give you the recognition that this is insane.
Welcome back to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast in 2019 just as a hobby because I was bored one day and I absolutely love podcasts. I lost my job during COVID, and thanks to my wife, she said to me, you've learned a lot of stuff about podcasting. I think you should help other people do this. And so I started 7 Million Bikes Podcast. And since then, we've now helped over 50 podcasts, produced over 700 episodes, helped create millions of downloads, and helped several podcasts get the top of the Apple Podcast charts. So in this show, Smarter Podcasting, we aim to help you make the best podcast possible. So we do that by talking to experts, sharing my own insight, tips and tricks, and also doing podcast audits. And so in this episode today, we have a brave guest who put forward her podcast after hearing Michelle O'Brien and the Upward Spiral podcast. And she messaged me and she said, Niall, I want you to roast my podcast. Now, I explained to her that this is not a roast, it's an audit, but I am going to give you an honest evaluation of your podcast. So my guest today, as the head of talent acquisition for Asia Pacific, saw the transformation in women who fully embraced their voices. She is the CEO and founder of Illuminate, a community and platform designed for women to create the career and life they love. And as part of that, she is now the host of Take Her Lead, a podcast that features real women with real stories of grit, determination, and resilience. She's joining me all the way from Singapore, and my guest today is the amazing Nina Devouge. Thank you very much for joining us on Smarter Podcasting today.
Thank you, Niall. I'm so happy to be here and so ready to hear everything that you're about to share with me, so we can make better podcasts for all our guests as well as our audience out there.
Well, I am really excited to share this with you. I have listened through your last episode. But before we get started, so we're going to start with some questions that I ask every guest at the start of every audit. So first question is, and I have seen your video, so I do have an idea, but what equipment do you use to record your podcast?
It depends if we're using it in the studio or at home. So I'm going to say at home, I use a mobile mic, MOVO. I use the Bose earphones, and I usually have a camera called a Sony camera. You can see it right here. But I did not charge the battery today, so today I am using it. I don't know. I know it happens. I forgot to charge my battery. And then, so today I'm using my MacBook camera. I also have a light up here, which is in the form of a lantern, and some lights in the background, usually when I'm at home.
Nice. Pretty good setup then. That's so funny. I've been doing podcasting for years, and the things that you forget to do, like just charge a battery or bring a plug that you need or a cable, things like that. Generally, I can find my way around it, but sometimes you're like, Jesus. Anyway, so next question. How do you do your editing?
Currently have a video editor who I'm outsourcing all the editing to. I do not know how to edit. I've tried it before and I was like, this is definitely not my strength. So I have a freelance video editor that I work with.
Nice. I mean, and this is a really specific skill to do, and it takes a long time. So that's good as well, because you would take up so much of your own time. And it's one of the biggest reasons I think a lot of podcasts just disappear, because people start them, they think they're going to be easy, and it actually takes hours to create a podcast, not just the time you sit down and do the interview. So outsourcing is obviously something that we advocate for because we are the outsourcer. So that's great. Now, getting a little bit deeper, what is your podcast niche?
So Take Your Lead is about real women with real stories of courage, determination, and resilience. There are many of us out there who are looking to take the first step, but don't know how, or thinking that they're alone in their journey. So we interview women to get them to share their stories and normalize many conversations surrounding the difficult situations and episodes in our lives.
All right, nice. So this is a difficult question. What makes your podcast different than the other 250,000 podcasts that are published every single week?
Great question. And I like to think that we really want to normalize all the conversations, so we go into the hard stuff. We don't give our guests much time to prep either. And we start with a courageous story. So it's not just about them coming in and then, sharing about their expertise. It's them coming in and sharing something deeply, deeply personal that even some of them may not have actually shared with the people around them. So they tell us the courageous stories, and they tell us how it's helped them become who they are today and why they're doing what they do today, which is actually the person behind the what.
All right. And next question, what is the goal of your podcast for you?
To be the ripple effect and light up the path for every woman to lead and live courageously.
All right. And for your listener, what lessons or values do you want them to come away with at the end of each episode?
That it's okay to take a small step towards action to make a positive impact in themselves or the communities and their worlds around them.
I love that you can answer these questions, because generally when I ask people these questions, they struggle to answer them or they haven't really thought of them. And I don't know if you've thought of them before, but it is something that's really important for a podcast. So that's why I was asking these questions is, what is your niche? And you may or may not know you need to have a very specific niche. One of the things that's the worst thing you can do that some people do, they say, oh, I'm going to make a podcast about everything and anything. And even if you go on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you search for anything and everything, you will find thousands of podcasts with that title alone, never mind that's their content. So it's good you have a niche. What makes you different? You want to stand out. There's obviously so many podcasts, not as many as people think. There's way more blogs. There's way more YouTube channels. It's one of my biggest pet peeves is when somebody says that there's too many podcasts or they've all been done. And it's like, so are there too many TV shows? Have Netflix stopped making new shows because there's too many? It's a ridiculous concept to think that there's too many podcasts. We're really only just at the beginning of the podcast phenomenon still. It's good that you have a goal as well. What I was wondering was, did you have a goal in terms of, is the podcast there to support your business at all? Do you have any outcomes from the podcast that you want? Because when I asked that question, you didn't answer that way, but I'm digging a bit deeper. Do you have any goals from the podcast? Like, is it a marketing tool for your business?
Well, if you think about the ecosystem for the business, right? I do think that it is a way to build top of funnel and brand authority. If I think about it in the ecosystem, it's so high top of the funnel that do I have goals and KPIs that this will bring me in leads? The answer is no. What it does do for me is it puts me front and center, me and my co-host actually front and center of this very important topic that we want to ignite in people. We want to ignite the fire in people to go like, wow, we should normalize these conversations. We have to. So to answer the question, high top of the funnel, add awareness, opening up people's minds, and whether it trickles down, we're okay whether it trickles down or not. Because it's a larger movement that we want to create together.
I absolutely love that. And it's great that you're aware of that, because a podcast for me as a business is an absolute crucial marketing tool. but it is top of funnel marketing. So it's great that you know that phrase, because again, some people don't, and some people don't care. Some people say, oh, I'm just making it for fun, but most people, the podcast that we work with, we want to make sure that there's a tangible benefit from it. And top of funnel marketing, like you say, is really hard to factor into your KPIs. Even I have sponsors, and I checked in with one of them lately, and they was like, we're not really getting any leads from it. And I was like, you're not really going to get any leads from it. This is not a direct to sale sponsorship. It's very unlikely. Like when I listen to a podcast, I never click on a link. It's more about, but I had to remind them as well, it's like a TV advert, right? You don't watch a TV advert and then go, oh, I'm going to go buy that laundry powder right now. It's more like 2 weeks later, you're in the supermarket and you see it and you're like, oh, I saw that on TV. I'm going to give that a try. So it's good that you're aware of that as well. And I think it's something that people really need to be aware of and understand. That's what, if you're going to make a podcast part of your marketing ecosystem, as you say, then it is very much top of funnel. And then my last question was, what lessons or values do you want your listeners to come away with? I think this is really crucial because I think every podcast episode needs to have that, and so that the listener knows exactly what they're going to come away with. And we're going to delve into that a little bit more as well. So brilliant. So you obviously have a great setup when you're in the studio. I saw your last episode because it was on video. So you record, I believe, at Podster in Singapore.
That's right.
Which is a great setup as well. So I'm very, very jealous of that because we don't have something like that yet in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, where I am. But it's great as well that you have the home setup as well. I wanted to share with you about one of my favorite affiliate partners, and that is Fiverr. I've been using Fiverr for years for everything from ordering YouTube thumbnails to keyword research, writing podcast articles, even to Canva designs and thumbnails and more. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a podcaster, or anyone in between, Fiverr has got you covered. It really is the go-to platform if you want to find freelancers offering a massive range of services to help you on any project. Maybe you need a stunning new logo or just a short animation. Whatever you need, you can find it on Fiverr. What I love the most is how easy Fiverr makes it to connect with talented freelancers from around the world, all at prices that will fit whatever your budget is. Plus, with Fiverr's secure payment system, you can trust that your transactions are safe and secure. No dodgy people you meet on Facebook groups that disappear with your money and never give you what you want. What, that's only happened to me? As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you use the link and at no extra cost to you. As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you click my link and you buy something, all at no extra cost to you. And best of all, you will be directly supporting the making of this podcast that you're listening to for free, but it is not free to make. So why wait? Head over to somewhere that you've probably never been before. It's called the show notes. So whatever app you're listening in, if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything at all, head to the show notes, click on my special link, and then you can browse thousands of gigs ready to help you with your next project.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, I'm not sponsored. I'm not an investor with Podster. So I want to say that we absolutely love them. We love their service. We love going in and out. It's a great way to just, especially when you want to bring in really prominent guests or just even have a very deep discussion. This is a great setup. The why we do a mix of both is because my co-host Cheryl, she travels a lot. So we have to fit in her schedule as well. And we also want the opportunity to be able to interview guests from all over the world. This afternoon, I'm actually interviewing someone in Sydney. So this home setup is so important, and the hybrid model as well is really key. So that's what works for us.
Now, this microphone you're using, the Movo, I don't know that microphone. Do you know if it's a condenser or a dynamic microphone?
How do I know what it looks like to identify it?
I think this is a condenser microphone. And the difference between condenser and dynamic is a condenser microphone picks up the whole sound of the room. It picks up everything. And so when in the description there, when I Googled it, it says podcast, it said studio quality. A condenser microphone is best for a studio like where you are in Podster because it's sound treated. There's very little white noise. There's very little background noise. When you use a condenser microphone in a room like you are, it's picking up all the noise that's bouncing off the walls and the tiles and everything like that. And I started off with a condenser microphone and the sound quality is not great. I'm using right now a dynamic microphone, and a dynamic microphone, it's what you're using in the studio I saw in Podster, only picks up the sound that's in front of it. It doesn't pick up all the white noise around here. So I'm actually sitting at home in a massive empty room, tiles for the noise to bounce off of, walls for the noise to bounce off of. And in that case, it should be bad audio, but there's a couple of things. One, it's dynamic, so it's only picking up my voice, not any other noise in the room. And two, I'm sitting a fist length away from the microphone. So that's why before we started, I said, how close are you sitting? You want to be about this close to it. And that means you can get really good sound. So even though you're close to it, a condenser microphone is picking up all the noise in the room, all that white noise that we can't hear, but the microphone can hear. So for your home recordings, I would suggest getting a dynamic microphone. It's another massive pet peeve of mine. The Blue Yeti comes up as one of the best podcast microphones. It's awful for home recordings. This model that you have, I've just Googled it. It says it's good for podcasts. It's not good for home podcasts is the problem. And I think that's what gets lost quite a lot of the time. So if you're interested, I would look at getting even just a cheap dynamic microphone will improve your sound quality from your home recordings massively.
That's super helpful to know. I have a question for you because this one here has these patterns and they have different. Does that even change anything?
Yeah. So I saw that as well. So it's got bidirectional, omnidirectional, actually my area of expertise, but unidirectional is what you want. So uni is just one direction. Bidirectional is two directions. So it means that you could have the microphone between you and a guest and it will record both of you. But again, the sound quality is not going to be great because you've got a microphone between you. You can't be close to it because you can't both be sitting right up on top of it. And at the same time, it's going to pick up the whole room. Omnidirectional is omni, so it picks up the whole direction. So if you had 4 guests, for example, or 6 sitting around the table, you could put the microphone right in the middle and record everybody. Again, repeat myself, but it's going to pick up the whole room as well. So it's still not going to be amazing. It's good for YouTube, Instagram, Zoom, TikTok, Twitch, and podcasts. I mean, if you're not really that bothered about sound quality, if you're doing like an Instagram live or something like that, yeah, I would say it's okay. But again, I would not recommend this microphone if you're just doing an interview like we are right now.
That's good to know. Someone actually offered me, like a really good friend of mine actually offered me a microphone for my birthday. Can I just show it to you?
Sure, yeah.
It says condenser as well. So maybe I can ask him if we could change it.
If it's a condenser, then I wouldn't recommend it. So it's you want a dynamic microphone. If you're recording not in a sound treated room, you want a dynamic microphone. So look at the difference with mine right now. This is me like close to the microphone. The sound should hopefully be coming through pretty good. As soon as I move away from it, hear me right? Like as soon as I turn my head, you can't hear me as well. So it really is only picking up this sound here. So it's just not picking up all this white noise in the room. So that's why I recommend a dynamic microphone unless you're in a sound treated room.
Okay, good. No, thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
I'm going to tell him after and say like, can you please help me to change that?
Yeah, it will make a massive difference.
At least I know I haven't opened it yet.
Oh, that's true. That's good. You can return it. Hopefully he has the receipt. Right, let's get into some of the infrastructure of your podcast. So I had a look on Spotify and we'll go through this relatively quickly because I actually do have quite a few things to share with you. So the first thing that everything I've learned, I've just learned from other people. And one of the people I look up to the most is Adam Shibley, who does the Podcasting Business School. And this is something that he advocates massively. And I do it on all my podcasts that I do for myself and for other people. And I gave the same advice to Michelle and anyone else that I do an audit for, anyone who will listen to me basically. So the name of your podcast is Take Her Lead. So what you got to imagine is I'm a listener, I'm scrolling for podcasts and I see a podcast called Take Her Lead. Does that tell me what the podcast is about?
I would like to think so.
I would say no. I would say take her lead. Is it a podcast about dogs, about dog leashes? Like take her lead. Let's take your dog on a walk. Like you've just got to remember, you want to make it crystal clear. So what Adam advises, and I do as well, is you don't need to change the name of your podcast because I think the name is fine. So 3 words, perfect. Take her lead. And I'm not dissing the name. It's a great name. What he advises is add a tagline to it that describes perfectly what it does with ideally a keyword that someone's going to search for. So you don't need to change your branding. You don't need to change the name of your podcast. Just change the name on your host website. For me, it's Buzzsprout. And then it will appear differently on like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So for example, my podcast started off as 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast. And then I realized, because I thought 7 Million Bikes was this quirky, fun name because there was over 7 million motorbikes in Saigon. But over time, I realized it means nothing to no one. Nobody really knows what it means. I still get questions about it to this day. That's why the company's called 7 Million Bikes Podcast. So we added the podcasts on to make it clearer that, it's still not that clear, but it makes it more clear that we're a podcast company rather than just 7 Million Bikes. And the colon was a Saigon podcast. So I guess it described that a little bit. Now our podcast is called A Vietnam Podcast, Community, Culture, and Conversations. So immediately someone sees that and they know this is what this podcast is about. It's not about food, not about the war. It's about community, culture, and conversation. So for you, you've already got in your bio section, inspiring women through real women and real stories. That could just be your tagline. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. It would just be take her lead, inspiring women through real stories, or real women, real stories, something just like that. So you don't need to change any of your branding or anything like that. Just the name that appears on the directories that will help people understand immediately what it's about. And if you can do a keyword in there, that's the advice that people give, so that when people are searching for it, they're going to find it. I don't know what that keyword would be. I don't know what the keyword would be for people searching for your podcast. Maybe just women, though, is like something, if someone's looking for podcasts about women. So you would have that keyword in there because you've got real women, real stories. So something like that. Now,
yeah, I mean that you're absolutely right. We actually kept real women, real stories as the bottom of our thumbnail, and so we can actually put that as a quick, easy lift into the title of the podcast. That will help. Yeah, in the searching.
What's interesting, you brought that up, because about your thumbnail, I think you should remove that from your thumbnail. Now, the reason why is you need to remember 80% of people listen to podcasts on their phone, which means that the picture is tiny. So that real women, real stories, for most people, they won't even be able to read it. So it's just taking up real estate and people can't actually see what it says. I mean, even I'm looking on my desktop right now on Spotify and I can still barely read it. So I would remove that. I think your artwork is great though, because it's simple. It just has the title, Take Her Lead, and it has the picture of the hosts, which is perfect, really obvious. So I think that's great. But I'm not a designer. I have zero design bones in my body. But from me looking at it as a listener, I'm not a fan personally of the colors of the branding and the logo and I think it's a bit dour, boring. It's a bit like bland, I guess, like light brown and maroon. To me, personally, I could be totally wrong because, again, I'm not a designer and I don't know how to give any advice how to make it better. I'm not saying make it neon pink, but just as a color palette, to me, it didn't make the podcast stand out. And you want to make it, I know you want to make it inspirational, and I didn't find that color palette inspirational, if that makes sense. So I would look at making your pictures stand out a little bit more. A lot of people these days do like the white lines around it, the outline. I often do that to really make it pop and stand out. And I would remove those words. And the other thing as well, again, not a designer, but when that word, take her lead, her is in, I don't know the name of the font style, but it's in like a handwriting font style.
Yeah.
Which again, I always think that makes things a little bit more difficult to read. So I would just think about having just a bold font for all of the words. Maybe you can change the color for her, or you can put a different outline behind it if you want to make that word stand out. But for me, if I'm looking at that on my phone, which again is really small, it makes it much more difficult to read just having that handwriting font. So again, I'm not a designer, but that was my opinion from when I looked at it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Now, still looking at the infrastructure, when I scan down, I see that you start every episode with the episode number. I wanted to know more about your thinking behind starting the title with the episode number every time.
Great question. I felt I was just following some of the podcasts that I follow in terms of their structure. So episode number 1, 2, 3 it's a helpful way to remember what is the right number before the next one. I'm not attached to it either way. I have a bigger question surrounding seasons though. Do people do seasons? Is it always on? So that's kind of where the thinking is, and I'm open to ideas.
Well, let me answer that question in a second. So going back to the episode numbers, I personally would advise not using them unless it is a sequential podcast that follows a story or follows a pattern. So I listen to some history podcasts. I listen to some fiction podcasts where you literally need to know which is episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because it's going to follow that pattern. With a podcast like yours and like mine, where it doesn't really matter which order you listen to them in, the reason I wouldn't recommend doing it is because it takes up valuable real estate. So if you got on your phone right now and you scroll Spotify, the letters cut off after, I think it's only like 120 characters. I might be wrong, but it's about that. So if you start every single episode with episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, you're giving up like, I can't even count it in my head, like 10 characters right away. And then the title's going to cut off. So what I do for my podcast is I just put it at the end. So it's still there, but I just make it really short. So to answer your questions about seasons as well, I do seasons as well, personally, because it allows me to take a break. So I will generally, over the last 5 years, I'll do about 10 or 12 episodes. Sometimes though, something's happened, like COVID, or something's happened in my life where I've only done 6 episodes or 4 episodes. It's just, this is the best thing about podcasts. It's completely up to you, right? So I would do seasons. It does allow you to take a break. When I have taken breaks, it has had no impact on my download numbers. And in fact, because of the way I designed my podcast, which is similar to yours, that it's evergreen content, it's not based on time. You're not promoting an event that's happening that week. You know, like I love football podcasts, but they talk about the football scores that have just happened that weekend. That's not evergreen content. I'm never going to go back in 2 years' time and go, I wonder what they talked about that weekend when Liverpool won 3-1. Like, so those shows will probably, I imagine, get almost 0 downloads of the back catalog. As you build up your back catalog, I get more downloads for my back catalog than I do for the episodes that I produce now. So you can do seasons. What I do is I do the title. I try and make it catchy. I try and make it sum up what's in the episode. And then at the very end, I'll do S9E1, season 9, episode 1. Just keep it really simple, really short, because it's not important to the episode. The other thing is on Spotify, you can choose if you look at the episodes by the newest or by the oldest. On Apple Podcasts, I'm almost certain it shows you the episode number anyway, so you don't need to put it in the title. So that's why I would say just take it out the title, completely focus on the title being something catchy that's going to grab someone's attention as they're scrolling. Because the other thing I learned as well, we all like to think that our listeners are sitting there waiting every week for the new episode and they can't wait. And some of them are. Those are called super fans and they're the best. But most people are going to come across your podcast. And I know I do this as well. If I find a new podcast that I want to listen to, I'm going to scroll down and find an episode that calls out to me that I'm interested in. I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, new podcast. Let's go all the way back to number 1 and listen to the newest episode, or let's listen to the oldest episode. I'm going to find one that resonates with me. So that's why the titles are really important. You want to just imagine that person that's scrolling down and then they see something that's like, oh, this is the one for me. This is what I want to listen to, which again, take out those episode numbers at the beginning. Right. Now, in your about section, I think it's really great. It summarizes what your podcast does. But what I noticed was there was no call to action. There was no CTA, which for you, from knowing your LinkedIn and seeing your LinkedIn, you already have a newsletter with 25,000 women, presumably women on it. Why have you not got a link to your newsletter in your about section?
That's a great question.
So even though it's top of funnel marketing and not many people are going to go there, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's not many people. I always just think about that one person that wants more information. So send them a link to your website. I've been on your website. It's a landing page, essentially, your website, right? So you should have a link to your website there. Someone clicks your website, they're going to get the landing page and they're going to sign up to your newsletter. And then I assume they're going to go into a chain of emails that's going to then convert them into a paid client, right? So these are all the systems that we have in place. So make sure that you're using your podcast as best you can to support your main goal of your podcast, which is why I was asking in the beginning, what is the goal of your podcast? So make sure you have a call to action in your about section as well.
Yeah. Super idea. I wasn't thinking about that at all.
To be honest, I'm one of these people, it's like, do what I say, not what I do, because I probably don't do half of this stuff myself. I should do an audit of my own podcast because it is much easier when you're sitting looking at someone else's podcast. And I do love doing this because I'm able to look at it from a different angle. That even I look at my own shows, because I'm the same as everyone else. I'm so busy. You're trying to put out content. You're trying to make shows. There's so much involved in it. And it's easy to forget these things as well. But that is something I would definitely recommend. The only other thing I noticed about your about section was you don't explain who you are. So you say, join Nina Devouge and Cheryl and take a lead. Yeah, there's nowhere in there that you say who you are. Like you say your name, obviously, but who are you? Why are you the host of this podcast? So I would include that, and it just needs to be a one-liner, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I want to ask a very important question before we move on to the actual show. So I was scrolling through your Spotify. Now you have a video editor. Who does the show notes for your podcast?
Cheryl.
Cheryl. I'm going to guess that Cheryl uses ChatGPT to create those show notes.
No, maybe.
Well, because we use ChatGPT to create the show notes for our shows. And it's interesting because I had this discussion with my senior editor this week. And I said, I've noticed something about the show notes that we do, and I don't want you to ever do this again. And so we've actually changed the way we've done show notes. So I looked through your episodes, and 5 of your episodes started like this. In this enlightening episode, ... In this episode, ... In this inspiring episode, ... In this powerful episode, ... In this heartfelt and honest episode. So they all start the exact same. And again, what you got to think about, someone scrolling, they just see the same phrase, and it's just classic ChatGPT. It's in this adjective episode. So for one, I would scrap that. Make sure you change that. It's not inspiring. It doesn't grab people. What we do is 2 things. We start every show notes with a quote from the episode, something that's going to grab somebody, and it's in bold and it's italics and it's in a quotation mark, so that when they're scrolling through our shows, the first thing they see is a quote about the episode and it grabs their attention. And we've just changed this week. We have now started doing show notes in the first person written by the host. So this is a new concept that we're trying out. So instead of saying, in this episode, Neil and Nina talk about blah, blah, blah. Now we're changing it to, I talk to Nina about blah, blah, blah. And it's not a big change, but it's a little change. And we're going to see how that does. We don't know yet, but we think that's going to be more personal, more grabbing when someone reads the show notes and they go, oh, he's talking to me about what he did in this episode, not this third person talking about something that nobody's related to. So I don't know if that works yet. We're just going to try it out, but I would recommend getting rid of that initial intro anyway, at the very least.
Okay, that's super helpful. What I've taken down here is, to do a quote that's attention grabbing. The question I have for you is there a template that you deem has worked really, really well, apart from, just the quote or like in this? And I do, the reason why I think about it is for me, I don't see ChatGPT as a bad thing. I actually see it as an amazing thing to help us like think about production, think about all of these things, roles and responsibilities, etc. I just want to know if there's a way to put a template together so that we can train this to help us, right? And so that the podcasting post-production and distribution becomes an easier lift.
So we use ChatGPT for everything, so I'm not knocking it. The thing about AI, I talked to Sam Sethi recently, and he said it should be called assisted intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because what it's giving there, what I just said, with like in this episode, blah, 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 that's just, it's a machine, right? It's doing what you ask it. Give me show notes about this episode. Then you need to have a human be like, hey, I don't want this. So you either prompt it and say, don't do this again, or I want it like this, or you just change it yourself. In terms of template, I don't do the notes personally myself. Chelsea, my senior editor, does them. So she may have a template. Your question was, do you have a template that works? It's hard to measure what works in show notes because the only real way to do it is, are people clicking the link? So I would say put a trackable link in there, use Bitly, so that the links that you have in there, you can see where are they coming from. I've done it before. You do get clicks. There's not like 0 clicks. People do click the link in the show notes. So if you really want to measure it, put a trackable link in there. And then again, it's like A/B testing, right? So all of this is like more work and you probably don't want to do it. And it's small gains. And even I don't do it. But if you wanted to do it, I would do A/B testing, do one episode in one style with a link, do one episode in another style with a link, which one gets the most clicks. But obviously that's all a lot of work and maybe not going to make the massivest difference if you get one more lead out of it. That's going to take you another 8 hours. So it's all about just figuring out the time and things like that. But I would work on your show notes. I think you'll see a difference.
Okay, that's super. So we'll come to prioritization in a bit, but that's a good. And by the way, nothing down, I'm actually taking down notes.
Awesome. Well, you'll have to make sure you watch the episode when it comes out, and then you'll have this as a resource as well. We haven't even gotten into the episode, so we're going to get into the episode now. So this is why I was saying to you at the beginning, I don't cover content because it's not my forte, is the content of your episode. It's more about how you structure the episode in the apps and then in the episode. So let's get into the actual episode. So I love the beginning. So you start with a hook, which is what we do as well. We take 30 seconds at the beginning to capture the interest, and hopefully people will keep listening. I'll keep watching as well. So that was great. You had subtitles on the hook. You almost did everything that we do in the beginning. So that was great to see right away. But so during your introduction, and I was watching the video, and I find this really difficult, right? Because I'm probably like an old school podcaster. Podcasts are audio, but unfortunately times have changed and now podcasts are video as well. So you're doing video, you've got video on Spotify, which means that you want people to watch this. You obviously have YouTube as well. So that's great. So I try and look at it from 2 points of view. One is the audio, because podcasts are audio, but now we know people do video. So I look at it from a video angle as well. So this is what I noticed as soon as I started your podcast. So you see here how she's not looking at the camera and she's looking away. I'm almost certain she's probably thinking about like, what do I do next? Like it gets really nerve-wracking when you're on camera like that. So it's a little bit unfortunate, but I would give a bit of feedback, like make sure you're engaging with the camera. If I was editing this, I would have cut her out. So I would have focused only on you because I wouldn't want to put her on camera while she's not looking at it. And we make podcasts like this. We do podcasts. I work with one client. I won't say their name. And even she recognizes it. She'll message me afterwards and she'll be like, hey, can you make sure the camera's not looking at me? Because I know I was thinking of the next question and I was looking at the ceiling, and then I look at the video and sure enough, I can see her like looking away. So I'm not giving her any criticism. I know how difficult it is. I'm almost sure it's either nerves or I'm about to speak. What do I say next? But for the viewer, it's not the listener in this case because the listener can't see it, but for the viewer, that was the first thing I noticed was like, oh my God, she looks really nervous.
No, that's super helpful feedback. I did notice it in one of the other videos, but I didn't pay too much attention to this one. So this is super. It's good to, and I I don't have the same eye as you do, so it's good to know that. Okay, hang on, like this is something that we need to do, I had the same. Like, I'm sure I've done it myself too. So this is very good.
We all do it. And I think I could tell she was nervous because I'm going to keep playing it. Her first word is, let's see, Let's play it and you can hear. So she goes, "Hi, I'm Cheryl," which is a filler word, which we would normally cut those out. And it's just not good to have the first sentence have a filler word, which, but again, it just shows nerves, I think, when you're using filler words straight away.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to keep it playing. In 3 seconds, it cuts to your guests and there's an awkward silence. And it's strange that it cuts to your guests because you haven't even introduced them yet. So we don't even know who they are. Cheryl does introduce them straight after, but it's just this very brief second. And I know I'm being really harsh right now, but there's a very brief second where it cuts to your guests unnecessarily. So we just keep watching for 3 more seconds. So she does introduce them straight away, but it's a little bit weird because it's kind of like, why are you introducing them? Or sorry, why has your editor made it that you can see them before you've even introduced them? So that's just a small thing. But one thing, a common mistake that everyone I do an audit with makes, and it's just because you probably don't know, is when you do the introduction, it's really similar to your about section. You don't tell listeners who you are. So it's not just your name. You don't tell listeners who you are and why are you the guide? Why are you qualified to take the listener on this journey? So it goes back to the questions I asked in the beginning. The listener is the hero of this story. They're the ones that you want to guide through this journey, through this episode. That's why you're going to tell them at the beginning, what's this podcast about? What's this episode about? And who are you to be the person that's going to take them through this? And so I said to you at the beginning, if you pay attention to my introduction, if you think back all the way now, so when I introduced this show, I said, this show is to help you make the best podcast possible. I told you exactly what you're going to learn from this show. I told you who I was. I started my first podcast in 2019. I just did it very quickly. And then I told you what this episode is about. We're going to do a podcast audit to help you make the best podcast possible and share tips and tricks. So I would just think about redoing your introduction along this lines of the same way you redo the about section, is just who you are, why are you the guide, and what's this episode going to be about?
This is great. So can I just repeat what I've heard? And because I've written a few things down as well. So who am I? Why are we doing what we're doing? Right? Which is also the guide, right? And who have we invited today? And how do they fit into the bigger picture?
Exactly. And I'm going to give you one last tip, which is the biggest tip I've ever learned. And people love this as well. So when you're introducing your guest, I learned this from watching and learning from late night show hosts. So, like Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Jay Leno, all of these guys. Jay Leno, showing my age there. That was years ago. But Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel. So what they do, and I did this for you, so that's why I was asking to pay attention. And I do this for all my guests. You say 3 things about your guests before you say their name. And then I learned this recently as well. And then you give them a compliment. So if I go back to my notes for you, because I wrote this down before, I said you were the head of talent acquisition and you saw the transformation in women. You're the CEO and founder of a company and you're the host of a podcast. My guest today is the amazing Nina Devouge. So I build you up with 3 things to get the listener excited, get the listener interested. What also happens is generally the guest gets really pumped up and excited as well. It cuts through some of the nerves. You're giving them the kudos. You're telling them why they're amazing. And you do all of this before you give their name. And the example I saw was Jimmy Fallon was introducing someone and he said, my guest today has just had a Netflix hit. He's doing a worldwide sold out tour and he's one of the biggest comedians in the world. My guest today is Dave Chappelle. And then Dave Chappelle walks out. So by this point, the audience are clapping. Everyone's excited. Dave Chappelle's looking good, feeling good about himself. So this is the structure, the template that I do for every episode that I think works really well.
And do you do that? So when you have 2 guests, for instance, do you do that for both?
I don't often have 2 guests, but I would do that for each of them. My guest today, my first guest is 1, 2, 3. It's blah, blah, blah. My second guest is blah, blah, blah. It's blah, blah. Just like that.
Oh, super helpful. Oh, this is amazing. Thank you for that. I think we have such easy tweaks that I can immediately put into play this afternoon.
No, I'm excited for you, and thank you so much. And just similar on the same line, we've already talked about it, but you introduce the episode, but you don't really say what value the listeners will get from it. You say it's about sustainability and fashion, 2 things that you love, but you don't really say this is, again, goes back to my questions in the beginning. What do you want the listeners to come away with? So somebody listens to this, they press play. They don't really know who you are. They don't know what your background is. They don't know why you're there. They know it's about sustainability and fashion, but those are two massively wide topics. So they don't really know what it's about. They don't know what they're going to learn from it. They don't really know who the guests are. And again, these are all just small tweaks, but I think this is things that can make your podcast, especially the introduction, so much more powerful.
No, super helpful. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Do you like the logo placement on the right side?
I do like the logo placement. I don't like the logo. But I do like logo placement. That is good. I didn't write that down, but I did think about it. I did notice it.
Thank you.
Right. Now, this is pretty much, I've got a few more things to go through, but this is the biggest thing that I took away from it. All right. So you have 4 people on the show, and it's something that I spoke to you about at the beginning. You have at some point 4 people all making noises at once, doing exactly what I talked about, doing that background noise, going, yeah, What you want to do with a podcast, you want to create a relationship with one person, because most people are watching YouTube videos or they're watching a podcast, listening to a podcast on their own. So you want to create a one-on-one relationship with that person. It's really distracting to have other voices at the same time. It makes a little bit more sense on like a TV talk show where you may be sitting on the couch with your family watching it, but it doesn't make too much sense on a podcast as well. So there's a point when Rena's talking and you can just hear the other people in the background making those agreeing noises. What I think has happened, because I can understand how editing works, I think your editor has muted the other microphone, so you can't hear the other microphones it's not the recording sound. But when you have 4 microphones in the same room, even if you mute the other 3 microphones, that one microphone is still picking up the background noise. So I'm almost certain that it's still picking up everyone else in the room going, So as I was listening to her, that was all I could hear. The other thing as well, the sound level just seemed to be way too high. So I normally listen at about 80%, 70, 80%. I had to turn my volume down to about 30% because the sound levels were just way too high. So those are a couple of things, but this one was actually had me exclaim out loud, OMG. So I'm going to skip ahead here to 5:16. I'm going to let you watch this. So watch out for 5:16. Did you hear what happened there? So I'm almost certain your editor has muted the other microphones from not the speaker. And he hasn't unmuted your microphone when you ask the question. So you can't actually hear you ask the question, or you can hear something in the background, which is probably picked up on, I think is her name, Rena, on Rena's microphone. So that's a pretty big error to like have microphones cut out when they shouldn't be cut out. So you actually couldn't hear the question you asked at 5:16.
Okay. That's a good one, because I think that it's helping me to also understand like where the gaps are with the video editing and what I need to do to make sure that we are really checking every single video. Because a lot of the time, I think between Cheryl and I, we take turns to check the video. And to be fair, I think we're not looking at it with an eye that we should be having. So I think it would be super helpful to get a lens on it. And
it's really easy to miss these things. So when we do editing for a client, we actually have 2 people check it, because I know even myself, I will make mistakes. So we'll have a junior editor do the first edit, and then the senior editor or myself will then check it, make sure that there's no little mistakes like that, because they're easy to make, but it's really, it's a big error. It's a small mistake, but it's a big one. So we'll check it, and then we'll send it back to the junior editor. They'll fix it, and we'll do that before we send it to the client. And even then, sometimes mistakes slip through the cracks, but that's why we do it. Now, there's a couple, I'm just going to skip through because I don't want to labor on this too much, but there was another couple of mistakes that were quite egregious, I would say. So 8:34, let me just skip ahead to 8:34. Rena plays with her hair And by doing so, she manages to hit the microphone, which is really normal, but it creates a really bad sound. So I assume that you heard that there as she played with the microphone. She hit the mic. As she played with her hair, she hit the microphone, which is, again, normal thing to do, but you've got to make sure that's either cut out or you maybe just coach your guests before to just be really careful.
Yeah.
That would be an example where I would just say, if you touch the microphone, because it happens all the time, easy to like bang it. I talk with my hands a lot. Just take a breath and say it again if you ever think you touch the microphone. It's a reason why you wear headphones as well. None of you are wearing headphones. If you were wearing headphones there, you would hear, all of you would hear that she's hit the microphone. And that's people sometimes say to me, oh, why do I need to wear headphones? And I'm like, you will pick up so much more by wearing headphones. But I know the aesthetic might not be what you're looking for, so that's fine. Now, I'm going to jump ahead again to, this is something that I did a lot in the beginning and I still do sometimes. My wife listens to my podcasts and she said recently, she's like, you did exactly what you tell people not to do. And what it is, let me find the point I'm talking about so you can hear the example and then I'll explain to you what I mean. All right. So I'm going to tell you before I play it what it is that I've picked up. And it's something that, again, I do all the time and everyone does. People that I coach and people that I make podcasts for, I'm always having to give this little bit of coaching. What Cheryl does here is she posits several questions all at once and kind of goes off on a tangent and then brings it back. And then she still asks the guests about 3 questions at once. What, as a host, I've learned this over years of hosting and I still make mistakes. You want to try and give your opinion as an expert, not just ask random questions. This is one of these really tactics I hate when you're like, oh, blah, 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 question. You want to make it, give an expert opinion and then ask your guests one question. So we'll watch here and see what I mean and you'll be able to understand what I'm saying. So that's 1 question now. 2, 3, 4. That's 6. That was 7. Is this a great value buy? Hit the microphone there. That was 10. How do women look at it? And men, 11. So I know I'm being really picky and I feel really bad when I do this, but that was about 11 questions as part of that conversation. There was lots of filler words like, to improve, I think, as an interviewer. And I do think about interviewers like Jimmy Fallon, and I'm old enough to remember like Michael Parkinson in the UK and Terry Wogan. I think about the style that they would ask a question. If you had a talk show and you have a guest, it's the kind of job of the interviewer to give a little bit of their insight, ask a very direct single question, give it to the guest, and then let the guest run with it from there and let them talk.
Okay. So essentially, we give an opinion and then we ask one question at a time. And then we give it, and we get very clear with what we're trying to ask, right?
That's what I would recommend, yeah. Because I think you could see in that example, it was quite unclear what exactly was being asked. There was so many different questions. Like, what do you want the guest to answer at that point? Because you've just said so many things.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. This is incredible. I feel like I'm getting a massive feedback session. And it's, Neil, like, don't feel bad about, this is why we come to you, right? The fact that you're giving so much of little tweak that is going to be so game changing for the podcast. I think this is fantastic. So I want to give you the recognition that this is insane. Like, I would not have the eye. And at the end of the day, we're spending time and energy, and we are asking our guests to spend time and energy to be interviewed and to share their stories. The least we could do is make sure that we hold that space and that we ask really sharp questions and that we ourselves become sharper at our craft. so that every single podcast moving forward is going to be just, spot on each time.
Well, thank you very much for that. That does make me feel a lot better. I know I get worried. I'm like, I don't want to tell you bad news, but
that's kind. That's kindness right there.
Oh, thank you. Well, the next thing I'm going to tell you is my worst bit of news then. So that's perfect timing to tell you that. So I've kind of already told you this, but it was at this point of the podcast I had to stop listening because all I could hear was people making noise in the background the whole time. As I was listening to the speaker, all you could hear in the background was a low hum of And I don't know who it was. I couldn't see on camera, but somebody or several people were just continually making those noises. So the listener or the viewer obviously won't know this from our conversation, but this is the reason why before we started our conversation, before we hit record, I give a little bit of coaching and just say, in normal conversation, it's really normal. It would be weird if you didn't do it. It's normal in conversation to be like, yep, But on a podcast, it's really, really off-putting because we want to create that one-on-one relationship with the listener. So it's really important that you just give that little bit of coaching to yourself to remind yourself as well. I really mean it when I said to you, like, I'm giving this to myself as well. I have to remind myself, but also to your guests as well, because especially when you're in the same room like this, you can mute the microphones, but that one microphone that's not muted is still going to pick up everyone's noise in the background. So that's really important. And then in terms of like even the noise, the editing itself, I'm not going to lie, I wasn't impressed with. If you skip to the end, I skipped to the end after I couldn't listen anymore. There was kind of like a weird background buzzing noise let me see if I can find it. You're probably not going to hear it on this when I'm sharing my screen, but around about here, can you hear that? I can hear it even now. There's like this, it's like traffic or something.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think I have a feeling that upstairs there was a construction happening.
Oh, that makes perfect sense then. But that should be cut out by the editor, and we would cut that out in post-production. So there was that. But then this next one just made me laugh, right? So you were wearing some of the clothes that she suggested, right? So she asks you to come on camera. Watch this. You're literally not on camera right now.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I would have cut something or done something. I'm pretty sure there's a different angle that could have been used that would have meant that you were on camera. So that one was quite egregious as well. She says, I'll show it to you as well. And again, many people are listening to this, so you're kind of putting those people off. If you're listening, you can't see. So when we do podcasts for video, we try our best to make it that you could be listening to it and you're not losing out on anything. So that might mean cutting a word out. It might mean cutting a sentence out, or coaching. Like when I do my podcast, I'll try and say things like, thanks for tuning in instead of thanks for watching or thanks for listening. Because if you say thanks for listening, you're alienating the viewers. And if you say thanks for watching, you're alienating the listeners. It's just these little things that are difficult.
Yeah. So thanks for tuning in.
That's what I say, but you don't have to. There's one more.
Be more inclusive of everybody.
That's what I think. Yeah, that's what I think. And I coached Michelle on something similar. I don't ever say welcome back because somebody might be listening for the first time and I don't want to alienate that person that's listening for the first time. So I just say welcome to the show. To be honest, I can't remember what you said. I didn't write anything down regarding that, but it's in the same train of thought. Just say welcome to the show instead of welcome back. So you're not alienating anyone who's listening for the first time. This was one of the worst ones, though, so I'm so sorry, but let me just get to this.
So
if we keep playing, look out for 39 minutes and 47 seconds. This was the angle that should have been used when you were showing off the clothes, but just wait till you see what happens next.
Oh my God.
That's what I said when I saw it. I was like, oh my God. So you obviously, that was meant to be cut. You say, let's do a quick wrap up and someone says, sure, not yet. And then it cuts to you doing the wrap up. This was obviously meant to be cut. Again, mistakes happen. but it's pretty egregious that you guys should watch what your editor does afterwards before you publish it, because that's added up now to quite a few different mistakes.
Yeah, I'm just writing these things down because I feel like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of changes that should have been caught. And I was away at this time, so I trusted that the work would have been done in a certain way. And clearly, we have a lot to do in terms of really refining where our inefficiencies are, and it's super helpful to get this third eye perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that this helps. There was even another bit here I'm just going to pull up where Cheryl hits the microphone again. Let's see if I can find the right bit. Which again is so normal. Like, I do it all the time. I talk with my hands as well. It's just something you need to kind of train yourself. And again, if you'd been wearing headphones, you would hear immediately in the headphones, like, oh, I've just hit the microphone, and you would know to redo it. But again, like I said, maybe the aesthetic is not what you're looking for. Just trying to find the bit, but it doesn't really matter. Or maybe it's here. Hold on. There again, she hit the microphone. So again, these are just things that should be cut out. It's not the most professional for these things to be left in. So that's my take on the editing. Just be careful with your hands. And then the last thing is, there is a school of thought that you're about to see is going to happen right now, that you should finish an episode really suddenly to boost engagement. Don't have a long outro, because then people know that the outro is coming. They know the end of the episode is coming, and they'll just skip to the next episode. So I would just finish with a quick call to action, which again, you didn't do. Hey, check out my newsletter. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, do all those good things as well. And I want to give a massive thank you to my guest, Nina Devouge, for coming on today to Smarter Podcasting. Nina, thank you so much for being on Smarter Podcasting.
No, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and so generous with the feedback too. I do believe that giving feedback is kind. So this is super helpful because it's going to help me with the podcast and, really making the impact that we want to make with all the women out there.
Amazing. I can't wait to see the differences. Cheers.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, a highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.